I got on, you were talking about the sun shining in Toronto.
It's been rare this winter.
So I hear. But we are an incredible people. Israelis have survived wars, terrorism, elections. But the last few days, they have been trembling with the rain that we have been having. Now, there's a plus for that.
Good for the grass. So good for
The streets have been a little emptier, I've noticed. And on the other hand, when they are crowded during the rain, drivers have been driving a little slower. And I'm grateful for that. But certainly we can't ignore another act of nature, how awful the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. The loss of life, of so much life. They're saying now over 11,000 people combined. Just horrific. But no less disturbing on another level is what we've been hearing both about Turkey and Syria. So first of all, how Syria has refused Israel's offering to give aid. But Turkey, they've been talking a lot about the government having failed to ensure decisions that they had made years ago following previous earthquakes, that they would be much more careful in enforcing laws about building, realizing you can't control the earthquake, but you can have an influence on the stability, literally, of buildings. And they have found the government guilty of not putting forward that enforcement, and monies that were to go toward that, they have Very, very distressing when you hear stories like that. I am sure it's not the only country is guilty of that, but to think that somebody can look to benefit by taking shortcuts and live with that, very distressing. And perhaps not entirely off our topic of God and politics. Because how can somebody who does take those shortcuts claim to believe in a God that cares about everyone? Okay, so may their families find strength to continue to rebuild literally and emotionally. Awful. We've had, just as an aside, a few much smaller earthquakes over the last couple of days in Israel. And I'm beginning to worry because I didn't feel them at all. So I don't know. Anyway, okay. So Dennis Prager, the thinker and the LA talk show host who I mentioned last week, at the start of the interview that we referred to with Yoram Hazony, tells us that he was asked, does he have one show in particular or one guest specifically that stands out for him more than any other over the 30 years, over 30 years, that he's been hosting his talk show. And he said, in fact, there is one. And he describes how he sat with what he called perhaps the holiest person that he ever sat with in his studio. A Polish Catholic woman who had slept with a married Nazi, violating, in so doing, every principle she had on sexual behavior as a Catholic. Now, why did she do this? You might guess, in order to save Jews that were hidden nearby during World War II in Warsaw. And he calls her a great. He also tells us that there were some people who did not approve of what she did because she broke a law. But Prager says, and this is in the introduction to this book, God and Politics in Esther, that it's a perfect example of using sexuality in a way that is sinful on paper. Sinful on paper because it's to save life. Now, why use this as an introduction to this book? Anybody want to just try to suggest a reason? We all know the story. Anyone? Okay.
It's an interesting way to start a book.
Okay, Sarah.
You probably want to read on.
Okay, well, this is in Prager's introduction to interviewing Hazony about the book. It's not in the book itself. I don't want you to go buy the book and be crushed that it's not there.
Okay.
But this is the first thing he brings up when he's interviewing
Right.
the author of the book.
Okay.
So aside from, yes, and in fact, I'll be honest, that's why I'm beginning this class with that story. It's not entirely true, but.
It brings out that moral quandary. You know, sometimes you have to do wrong to do right. And also the fact that, I mean, it was probably a very difficult decision for this woman to go against her principles for a greater principle or a different principle.
Absolutely, Brenda. This is something that I feel that I have conveyed, that beyond saying that the people in the Bible are real and they've made choices that we sometimes have a problem with, but I've used a pasuk, a verse, that sometimes in many places there can be a very specific commandment, and at the end of that pasuk verse, it adds on v'yasita hayashar v'atov, and do what is right and good. And I've come to understand that to mean, yes, you have your commandment and your principle on paper, but sometimes you have to decide for a good reason that you're going to stray a little, depending on the situation, and not to say that we believe in relativistic values. That's different.
Bracha, if we go back to last week's class,
Yes.
one of the things we talked about is Mordecai saying to Esther that she must put herself forward and use her feminine wiles, if you want to put it that way, in order to get to Achashverosh and at least give the people a chance to be saved. And if I remember correctly, your father, may rest in peace, once gave a sermon around Purim and using the words of Esther as in some ways being a harlot and Mordecai being a pimp, and putting her forward in that direction. You can tell that it was a very provocative sermon because I still
No,
remember
never
some
would
of
he
it.
do that.
I
Yes,
still remember at least what the idea was.
absolutely. No, specifically beyond what I just said about stories in the Tanakh, but yes, that's exactly why he uses it here, because Esther is going to be involved with things that we might say are a little questionable. And the fact that we put it in the Tanakh, that together with what we said last week, that there's no mention of God, but it was still decided to put in Tanakh, what Marlene is mentioning as well. Very, very significant. Thank you for sharing that. So Esther and Mordecai, political agents. Who or what is it that they are standing up to? The king of their home in Persia is ruler of most of civilization, from Ethiopia to India. And as Megillat Esther opens, we quickly see that this king, Ahasuerus, his principal concern is a 6-month-long carnival of drinking, Hazony calls it. And that's not a reflection of warm, altruistic hospitality on Ahasuerus's part. Rather, it is intended to display the riches of his glorious kingdom. His intent on the entire, and I mean the entire empire, if you read the verses, everyone was invited at one point to participate. He wants them all to see his immense financial and administrative power. And beyond seeing, he wants everyone to feel how powerful it is, and he is. So I want to share one second. Okay. So the first chapter, everyone is gathered there, and now even the general population. And the drinking was, I'm hearing myself on somebody's. Do you hear the echo? Yeah. Okay. And the drinking, Daniel, is there a way of us?
Try now. I'll mute everyone else.
Okay, thanks. But if you do want to say something, please unmute. And the drinking was according to the law, with no one coercing, for so had the king ordained upon every steward of his house to do according to every man's wish. What is the significance of this pasuk? What is it saying? That no one, even though they were in the palace and they should honor the king by drinking what he's offering them, no one is to be forced to drink. La'asot kirtzon ish va'ish. Let everyone do as he wishes. Why is that significant? Hazony continues and suggests that it was a show calculated to heap honor on Achashverosh and to create the impression in the eyes of his subjects, as well in his own eyes, that he is in control of the world. Now, what does that mean? Create the impression. It means that what he believes is true really isn't. And that's why he has to create the impression. What is Hazony implying when he says this? Achashverosh was actually not governing so well. Otherwise, there would be no need to impress everyone. Lacking power through political prowess and actual leadership. You remember Achashverosh never on his own makes a decision of substance. Achashverosh believes here, when he's holding this carnival, he believes that he can move toward power by bribing his empire with reckless extravagance and drink. Now, why was it important that he let everyone decide how he's going to drink? If he's looking for people to love him, and that's what he's looking for, then he wants them to feel a little powerful on their own. As Hazony writes here in the second text, he, Achashverosh, knows that he may demonstrate his power by issuing commands and having them obeyed. Yet he senses that he can achieve more by granting a small measure of freedom. Certainly, Achashverosh wants to feel that his subjects fear him and will do his bidding, but he wants much more. To truly feel he controls his people, he needs to rule their emotions first and foremost. He needs for them to love and respect him and to desire his rule. There is no better way of gaining the gratitude of others than by using power to bestow liberty. For this means granting a gift of power to another. For those whom Achashverosh has invited into his palace, accustomed as they are to submitting to the wishes of the king, this microscopic one-time grant of power can win their gratitude as no material gift can. Now, I highlighted he needs for them to love and respect him. What is the difference between that and in the Shema, us being told, V'ahavta et Adonai, and you shall love God your Lord? What's the difference? Anyone? God is also telling us to love him.
But God doesn't need us to love him. Whereas the feeling for Ahasuerus is he has this need for everyone to love him.
Okay, and what, Bev, is that underlying need? Not just that he needs to be loved. We all want to be loved, but he wants it for people to really feel his power. Now, I think in a similar way, God is looking for us to recognize his greatness, but not because it's important, without wanting to sound sacrilegious, not because it's important to realize how great God is, but hoping, as I said earlier in our intro comments, that if we're aware that there is this power that cares about every single soul, whatever country, that's his reason, not the selfish reason and egotistical reason that Ahasuerus has.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Elliot.
This need for power and control and respect, etc., reminds me of a recent US president.
Okay, we try to stay away from politics, even though I constantly make the claim that everything we read in the Tanakh has something to say about today, including what we're doing today. Okay? All right. So everyone can have his or her own thoughts about that. Okay. Now, so Ahasuerus is so desperate for power, but it shouldn't shock us. That's why God warned us not to have kings. And Mordecai looked to be close to the king. He sat outside the palace all the time, hiding his identity and trying to make ways to be close. So what is it that Mordecai cannot all of a sudden accept about this king? There's a change that happens in Persia, in Ahasuerus, with the appointment of Haman. In the before Haman period, Ahasuerus was open to influence from numerous directions. And that takes us back to the party. He has everyone there, and when he needs advice regarding different issues, including what to do with his wife, Vashti, he takes advice from others. He's looking for it. But that ceases with the appointment of Haman. Look at the psukim here. And the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's custom, to present the case before all who knew law and judgment. And the nearest to him were Karshena, Shatar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsana, Memuchan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, who sat first in the kingdom. So he was open. And now, after he appoints Haman, after these events, what are the events? When does he appoint Haman? I know it's been a year since you've read the Megillah. When does he appoint Haman? After his life is threatened. And what happens to him? He no longer trusts anybody. except this one person, Haman. After these events, the attempted attack on his life, King Achashverosh promoted Haman, the son of Hamidata the Agagite, and advanced him and placed his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were in the king's gate would kneel and prostrate themselves before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would neither kneel nor prostrate himself. Now, you know, a Jew, not to an idol, but to a ruler, was allowed to lower himself. And we know that Mordecai wasn't exactly, as far as we know, the most pious as far as religiosity at this point, unless he's doing this foreseeing what's going to be in the future. So why doesn't he bow down now? Is because he senses that there is something new and wrong going on here. Sure, Achashverosh was a buffoon, but you can live with that. But Mordecai was able to sense that now there was going to be a new government, a one-person government, Achashverosh on the side, and that there was going to be violence and abuse. What is the purpose of Haman being appointed by Achashverosh? And it's his will alone that is going to control the questions of the country. According to Hazony, Achashverosh wanted to do away with politics. Wouldn't we all want to do away with politics, except for one thing? Unfortunately, it doesn't always occur in the best of ways. But when Hazony says Achashverosh wanted to do away with politics, he was looking to silence the struggle among competing claims and truths. He didn't trust anybody now, once his life was endangered, and he doesn't want there to be discussions and diverse opinions. He wants to put an end to that. And therefore, this one person, Haman, will be the only one to have a say. And that makes him into an idol that Mordecai will not bow down to. So Mordecai sees and understands that he has to find a way to break Haman's monopoly and allow another voice to be heard. And there are two notions, beliefs, that give Mordecai guidance in his plan. First, and I'm going to ask you, what quickly comes to mind as I ask you, what are significant qualities of the Jewish people? Now, quickly, think of a significant quality that the Jewish people has, and please just share it.
Stiff-necked,
Okay, anyone else?
resilience,
Resilience. I think that
Chesed,
was Stan.
chesed.
Chesed, kindness,
Educated.
educated. Great answers. What else?
A belief in God.
Okay.
There's a unity. There's a certain amount of unity among the Jewish people.
A certain amount, depending on the day.
Yes. And the situation.
And that we question things.
Yefet, very good. Esther.
Chutzpah.
Yes.
Chutzpah.
Which actually-
Determination.
Who just said chutzpah?
Me, Stan.
Stan. Okay. And somebody else. Frida, did you say something?
Determination.
Determination. Okay. That chutzpah or questioning, Hazony says can be said succinctly in one word. Our name, Yisrael. You know that Yisrael was the name given to Jacob, Yaakov, when he wrestled. And that was a foreshadowing of our existence, that we have the ability, and it will be eternal, it seems, the ability to struggle with the world as it has been decreed, which means we are actually struggling with God, Yisrael. Because God has decreed the world to be as it is. He is looking, we've established that already, you and me, that he is looking for us not to just accept things as they are. Whether it's Avram questioning him about Sodom, or Moshe, or even Bitya. We refuse to accept the universe as it is. And that is what is behind Mordechai. He will not let his fears keep him away from acting. When you read, by the way, this week's Parsha, Yitro, read it carefully and see how Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, is different from every other people then. What he ends up doing. Not just a talker, but acts. Read it and you'll understand what I'm saying. And that's what we are meant to do. When we see something is wrong, we alluded to this last week, that we believe. And it is on paper in civil disobedience.
Yeah. Bracha,
Yes,
even today, in the Ten Commandments, we are told to honor our parents. But I remember a rabbi telling a woman whose mother abused her that she doesn't have to subject herself to that abuse.
absolutely. There are laws, halachot, about that. Yes, kibud ava'im, but to a point. When do you not have to? Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the second belief that guides Mordechai in this plan, the Jewish people are eternal, is eternal, people as but there is no place for fatalism or what Hazony calls religious quietism, because one might think, if we believe that the Jewish people is going to last forever, then why do we have to act? No, we already said that last week, that's one of the reasons God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah, because he is looking for us to act. Now, look at what Mordecai says to Esther when she initially rejects Mordecai's instruction to approach Achashverosh. And they told Esther's words to Mordecai. And Mordecai ordered to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine to yourself that you will escape in the king's house from among all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and rescue will arise for the Jews from elsewhere, and you and your father's household will perish. And who knows whether at a time like this, you weren't meant to be here." Now, we're reading this week for a little bit of a different purpose than last week. So, what two messages does Mordecai give to Esther here in these words, wanting her to listen to these words that the messenger brings? What is he telling her? Read them again to yourself. Gloria? Unmute yourself, please. No, you just turned yourself side. Okay. Gloria? No? All right, Gloria, you work on it. Bev?
And she has the opportunity to act. And if she doesn't take this action, then there probably will be somebody else who will. But this way, if she does the action, she'll get the credit for it.
That's interesting that you said that. That's being a little, I don't know what, that he's
Cynical.
telling her to do it so she can get the credit for it. Is that the real reason he wants her to do it?
No, he wants her to save the people. To save the
Okay,
Jews.
that's more like you, Ben, to feel that. Okay, now,
Bracha, I think there's another thing that's being said.
go ahead.
I think what Mordecai is saying to Esther is that you can run, but you can't hide. And
Exactly. Awesome. That, yeah, go on.
And I mean, when we look at the way that Jews were counted during the Holocaust, no matter how assimilated they were, they could run, but they could not hide.
Yeah,
And I think he's also speaking about the
Eternality.
eternal character of the Jewish people.
Absolutely. Okay. In those psukim, you see both, that he's saying, okay, whether it's going to be from another person or it's going to be from God, we're going to last. But you should be the human being now who's going to take this mission into your hands, upon yourself.
But Bracha, isn't it a typical characteristic of our people that we are people of action? Don't give me words, give me action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A line from My Fair Lady. You remember that? Words, words, words. Okay. Gloria, any success? No, I'm sorry. You're missing something. Okay, if you succeed, interrupt. Okay, so now, Esther doesn't immediately, but ultimately, she does join Mordecai in his mission. And her reaction is the following. And the copy of the writ of the decree that was given in Shushan, he gave him to show Esther and to tell her, and to order her to come before the king, to beseech him and to beg him for her people. And Chatach came and he told Esther what Mordechai had said. And Esther said to Chatach, and she ordered him to tell Mordechai, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who comes to the king into the inner court, who is not summoned, there is but one law for him, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter, that he may live, but I have not been summoned to come to the king these 30 days. So her first reaction is fear for her own life. She's not even concerned about being given this opportunity to maybe take credit for something. But that's her fear, that she's in a position now that she wants to hold on to at this moment. And from the start, we know that Esther was set on gaining the favor of everyone. This is what would happen during the auditions for the new queen. Then, with this, the maiden would come to the king. There were several maidens, and they all went through the same routine. Whatever she would request would be given to her to come with her from the house of the women to the king's house. Whether it was perfume, whatever it was, they could ask for what they wanted. In the evening, she would go, and in the morning, she would return to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shasgas, the king's chamberlain, the guard of the concubines. She would no longer come to the king unless the king wanted her and she was called by name. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, Mordechai's uncle, came to go to the king, she requested nothing except what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the guard of the women, would say. And Esther obtained grace, favor in the eyes of all who beheld her. Now, how is Esther different than the other maiden? The other maidens? They would make requests of what they specifically wanted to take with them to prepare for their meeting with the king. Unlike them, Esther, what does she do? She does not make any request. She says to Haggai, whatever you want. I trust you. Your opinion, what I should take, what I should not take. That's one example, without wanting to read too much from the text today. That's one example of her already having that savviness of being able to know how she will succeed in her new home, if it becomes hers. That she has to be liked by those around her. Now, in time, Esther does come to understand that finding favor isn't the essential act. Hazony compares Esther to Joseph, saying that Joseph repeatedly claims it is God's will that the Jews be saved through him. On more than 3 occasions, he says that. So what does that mean? That he feels justified in doing what he needs to do to stay with the power that he's been given. Now, we know he puts it to good use. However, he needs to stay in power. Now, how does that compare with Esther? In the beginning, she had thought she also has to take care of herself. Mordecai ordered to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine to yourself that you will escape in the king's house from among all the Jews." Okay. He's repeating. We're repeating. And Mordecai ordered to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine to yourself that you will escape in the king's house from among all the Jews. For if you remain silent, at this time, relief and rescue will arise for the Jews from elsewhere." We're reading this again to make it quite clear that she has to realize that he understands her position is no longer the key thing. And only after him repeating to her this point does she come around. And what does she say? Then Esther ordered to reply to Mordecai, "Go assemble all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, day and night. Also, I and my maidens will fast in a like manner. Then I will go to the king contrary to the law, and if I perish, I perish." She's come a long way. She realizes that her, Esther, Hadassah being there is not essential anymore. It's essential only to the point that she is going to try to change Haman's decree. But if she insists on staying away from requesting, then she realizes that's wrong and realizes, okay, if I perish, I perish. Gloria?
I think, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
go
so
ahead.
Just to be where you're at now, thinking about what's going through Esther's mind. She's in a lose-lose situation. If the king, she doesn't find favor in his Achashverosh's favor, she'll die. If she sits and do nothing, she's not protected because she's in the palace, she will die also. So what choice do you make? I think you're feeling like that. I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Better go for it.
Okay. Now, do you think everyone in that position, lose-lose, would still come to that decision or perhaps be in denial? That's the question. That's the question. Hazony says Mordecai seeks to deflate the importance that the individual in a position of power naturally tends to assign him or herself. This certainly speaks to so many of world leaders, and not just world leaders, on all different levels. And that's something that keeps very decent people who might be good at the job because of their values keeps them from even entering the race because of their fear that they too will become corrupt. That's a real problem. A real problem. Okay, now, let's move on to at least begin this week, Esther's strategy. And it came to pass when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, and remember, she hasn't been invited. Despite this, she won favor in his eyes, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What concerns you, Queen Esther, and what is your petition? Even to half the kingdom it will be given to you." This is consistent with the very beginning of the Megillah, where he is looking to show how grand he is, even to the half the kingdom. And Esther said, and now follow very, very closely. And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." And the king said, "Rush Haman to do Esther's bidding." And the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said to Esther during the wine banquet, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther replied and said, "My petition and my request are as follows. If I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will make for them, and tomorrow I will do the king's bidding." There's something strange here. Compare this last verse, 8, and verse 4. There's a change in the wording. I'll read it again. And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." And what happens in 8? I have found favor, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will make for them. So the first pasuk Daled, when she says for him, who is she referring to?
Haman.
Is she, yes?
She's referring to Haman. She's making this special for him to come.
Okay, and now, why does she change it to them for the second banquet?
Because the second time she's going to ask the king for something. She's sort of setting it up so that, that he'll have some kind of a part in it.
Okay, that's one way of looking at it, that she wants, it's as if she's thought to herself, "Oh, gee, that I'm going to prepare it for him." Achashverosh might get the idea that I am inclined toward Haman. But then she realizes, if I want something from Achashverosh, her husband, then I have to make it clear that it's for both of them. But which of the psukim is she really standing by? The first one. She intentionally, Hazony points out, wants Achashverosh to have a bit of a sense that something's going on here between Esther and Haman. Now, Hazony asks, why does Esther have to invite the king to come to this banquet and a second banquet in the company of Haman, instead of coming out directly and demanding that the decree be repealed and the Jews saved? Anyone? Why does she go through this? Why doesn't she directly ask? Why is there a need for these intimate banquets? Anyone? And think back to something that we said about the difference between pre-Haman period and now Haman period.
I think she has to soften the king,
Sorry?
to soften the king's heart.
Okay.
Bracha,
Anyone else?
I was going to say that Achashverosh has handed over his power and he may to Haman. So he may not be able to reverse the decree without Haman also, or he's reliant on Haman.
Okay, Brenda. She feels, will not grant or be able to grant the request. But what's another thought? Remember that we said earlier that Achashverosh doesn't want to deal with any of this. And she knows that she can't talk policy with him. A very practical reason.
She's okay.
And she doesn't want to put him in the position of not being able to call Haman's plan off, not be in a position where he has to choose between Haman and Esther. So Esther is showing that she has more skills than just trying to find favor. Now, is this a quality we want our Hadassahs, our Esthers to be proud of? I'm leaving that as a question. Answer me. That she has this ability to strategize and have in her mind, well, I remember that my cousin Mordecai taught me that I have to be realistic. And I know that things have changed with Haman being the man in charge. And even if I'm willing to perish, that doesn't mean I have to go out of my way to do that, but I can manipulate.
But Bracha, don't we say that you get a lot more with honey?
It depends on who you're dealing with. It depends on whom you're dealing with. Okay, so anybody want to continue Esther's thought vis-a-vis? Is anyone opposed to what Esther does here? Or anyone?
I think she has to be careful, and I think by doing this, she's sort of taking care of herself. She's pointing out, that she wants and needs something But again, by laying the groundwork and just, and not requesting it so fast, she's, allowing them to enjoy themselves before she comes out with what she needs.
Okay, interesting, Bev. On the other hand, what is she in fact doing here? She's trying, by giving her husband the sense that maybe something's up between her and Haman, she's trying to drive a wedge between the two of them, because she feels that that's the only way that Ahasuerus will change the edict. If he sees that also Haman has a flaw, like everyone else that he trusted. And that's what she's thinking. Sure, there could be a possibility that she's stalling for time. I don't know. Anyone else?
Bracha, I think some of this actually stalling is because she's already ordered Mordecai to tell the people to fast for 3 days. And she wants to see that is happening, and that they are behind her in understanding that something's afoot to save them from Haman's decree. So she wants to know that she's got their support behind her. That's number one. And number two, I think that she wants to really have Haman make his own fate. She's really making him complicit, and he's going to, as they say, hoist himself on his own petard. He's going to show his guilt without her actually having to come out and say, he's guilty and I want him dead.
Okay. All right. Now, Bev, Marlene just gave you some support. And okay. Yes. Yeah, Marlene, a good thought. Sandy, I think you wanted to say something.
I was thinking that it's not kind of like the elephant in the room, but we haven't brought up the fact that women traditionally, when they have to deal with men in power, use their feminine appeal. And she just brought it all. She even from the time of Adam and Eve, there's wiles and there's ways to do it. And it wasn't the way it was then, from what I was reading, that it's not as much as she was putting on, as much as they would be taking off as well. So when she went to see the king, she had him where she wanted. So that was the first thing. But knowing in her mind with the fasting, it's part of the whole package of what women can accomplish. Because once, you know, the beauty, the initial impression is worn off, she has to have depth. She has to know. She has to get that courage going, and she has to have confidence, and she has to have her little ducks in a row. And I think it goes beyond Haman, because what was just another possibility, that when she has Haman and the king, she wants also to keep buttering up the king, that this is at first she wanted to get to Haman, but it still had to come through the king in essence, and she had to make him feel even more powerful by bringing him and putting it to him in such a way that he had her back. And I think that Haman also in the whole process was just so stupid that he couldn't figure out where it was all leading, and he was contributing to his own demise. And I think the more that was going on, the more strength she was gaining in her own ability to continue, and the more strength, it means that she was more at ease even with the king. So it was just unfolding as it should, is what I'm saying. And the very beginning of it was really that she had to be able to appeal to get to the king, and she had to make it. That's the way it's been, whether they're spies and whether women were spies, or whether you're talking about Adam and Eve. It's been historically those women that could do it, but those who couldn't do it, we don't know about because they failed. They
Okay.
Beautifully
what's gonna
said,
happen.
Sandy. Very complicated, and she
Yeah.
certainly was multitasking, even if that wasn't a word in those times. But yes, that's why we call it
Multitasking, yeah.
strategy. And we began with saying how we want to look at this ancient text as something that speaks to today. Because everything that's going on here, again, as I said, without getting into politics, we're aware of. And we can only continue praying at least 3 times a day for our leaders to hear everybody's voice. I think that's an incredible insight that Hazony has about Mordechai realizing that with Haman, democracy, even by a buffoon, has ended. And is that not really what we'd like to believe, that all parties in the Knesset, in the parliament, have their country's best interest in mind? I have to believe that. But the sharing of ideas, you should have more of a sense that it's for holy purposes, without thinking of a better word. Anyone else? Okay, wait, Morella, are you trying to say something?
You know what, I just think that maybe I'm being cynical, but that I think that best interest, I think probably everybody does think they have a country's best interest at heart. But what I think is right for in terms of my best interest or the country's best interest is not necessarily what somebody else thinks is right for the country's best interest. And I think that's where the tension is these days.
Yes. It's no, it's a real issue, but everyone has to believe in what they believe, but there's got to be a tiny space for being open to listening to another, unless they're absolutely wrong. And they are. But just to close with something that Hazony says, and I'm gonna not share it, but I'm gonna read it, so I think you might not see my face for the moment, which is fine. So long as Achashverosh took decisions through broad consultation with a range of advisors, there was every reason to hope that the laws and actions of the Persian state would tend toward at least the roughest approximation of a just settlement among the competing perspectives, interests, and truths in the empire. Haman's installation, however, eliminating as it did the action of interests other than his own, because that's all Haman was interested in principle suppressed the search for a greater truth. I'm going to end that there because it's making me think of our Talmud. Why? Hillel and Shammai and other rabbis, that the decision does not go by their thoughts, but they're in the Talmud because there might be a time that what they're saying is what we will follow. So we have this in our sources, the civil disobedience, the listening, to be sure that we are working toward the truth. I feel that this is perhaps a good place to end because I feel like I could go on and on, unless somebody else still has something to add. Okay.